Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by lush green fields and rustling palm trees, there lived a young girl named Clara. Clara was the pride of her family, not just for her stunning beauty but for her gentle heart and innocent nature. Her widowed mother, Margaret, often spoke of her with pride, believing Clara's future held great promise. It was the Christmas season, and as was tradition, the village buzzed with festivities. Men and women adorned their best clothes, children ran about, and everyone gathered in the village square to celebrate. Among the visitors that year was Richard, a wealthy businessman who had returned to his family's ancestral home for the holidays. Richard was tall, charismatic, and had a charm that could disarm even the most cautious woman. His flashy car and designer clothes made him the center of attention wherever he went. One evening, as the festivities reached their peak, Clara crossed paths with him. He approached her with a confident smile. "You're the most beautiful woman I've seen in this village," he said, his voice smooth. Clara, unaccustomed to such attention, blushed and looked away. Their brief encounter turned into a conversation, and one thing led to another. Richard was persuasive, showering Clara with compliments and promises. That night, in the privacy of the moonlit fields, Clara experienced her first taste of love, or what she thought was love. By the time Richard left for the city 2 days later, Clara was still reeling from the intensity of their connection. She thought about him constantly, wondering if he felt the same way. A month later, Clara began to feel unwell. Nausea, dizziness, and a growing sense of dread took over. Her mother, Margaret, noticed her condition and confronted her. "Clara, what is wrong with you? You've been acting strange for weeks," Margaret said one morning as they prepared breakfast. Clara hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes. "Mama, I think I'm pregnant," she finally admitted. Margaret dropped the spoon she was holding, her face a mixture of shock and anger. "Pregnant? Clara, who is responsible for this?" "It's Richard, the man who visited for Christmas," Clara replied, her voice trembling. Margaret's anger boiled over. "Richard? That rich man from the city? And you didn't think to tell me until now?" I didn't know how to, Mama," Clara stammered. Without wasting time, Margaret dragged Clara to Richard's family home. She banged on the gate until an older man came out. "Good morning," Margaret said, her voice laced with anger. "We need to speak with Richard. He has gotten my daughter pregnant." The man frowned. "Richard is back in Lagos. He left weeks ago." Margaret managed to get a phone number and called him immediately. When Richard answered, she wasted no time. "You're the one who got my daughter pregnant. You must take responsibility." Richard's laugh was cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know any Clara." Those words shattered Clara's world. Margaret hung up, her face pale with rage. She turned to her daughter. "You have brought disgrace to this family. How do you expect me to feed you and this child in this hard economy?" Clara had no answer. The weeks turned into months, and Clara endured whispers, stares, and judgment from the villagers. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, whom she named Emily. Despite her joy at becoming a mother, Clara's life grew harder. Her mother's disappointment lingered, and the weight of her situation pressed heavily on her. One day, as Emily turned 2, Margaret called Clara into her small room. "Clara, I've done all I can for you and Emily, but I'm old and tired. It's time for you to leave this house and make something of your life. Call one of your friends in the city and beg for help. You can't continue living like this." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew her mother was right. Clara sat on the wooden stool in their small kitchen, staring at the old phone in her hand. She had avoided calling her friend Linda for years. The thought of explaining her situation filled her with shame, but she had no other choice. Her mother's words had been final. She had to leave. With a deep breath, she dialed the number. Linda answered on the 3rd ring, her cheerful voice instantly bringing back memories of their childhood. "Clara, long time. How are you?" Clara's voice cracked as she replied, "I'm fine, Linda. I need your help." Linda listened patiently as Clara explained her situation. When Clara finished, there was a brief silence before Linda spoke. "Clara, you've been through a lot. Don't worry. Come to Lagos. You can stay with me until you find your feet." Relief washed over Clara, and she thanked her friend profusely. 2 days later, Clara packed her meager belongings, kissed Emily goodbye, and boarded a bus to Lagos. She promised her daughter she would return for her once things were better. Arriving in Lagos was like stepping into another world. The chaos, the noise, and the sheer number of people overwhelmed Clara. Linda welcomed her with open arms, showing her to a small but tidy room in her apartment. "You're safe here," Linda said. "Take your time, but we'll start looking for a job tomorrow." Clara nodded, determined to make the most of this opportunity. The next day, Linda and Clara began exploring the city. Linda, ever optimistic, pointed out job vacancy posters and introduced Clara to potential employers. Days turned into weeks, and though Clara faced rejection after rejection, she refused to give up. One afternoon, after an especially long day, Clara sat with Linda at a roadside food stall. "Maybe I'm not meant to find a job," Clara said, her voice heavy with defeat. "Don't say that," Linda replied, squeezing her hand. "You're hardworking and smart. Something will come." As if fate had been listening, Clara spotted a sign across the street. "Help wanted kitchen assistant." "Linda, look!" Clara exclaimed, pointing at the sign. Without hesitation, she crossed the road and walked into the small restaurant. The owner, a stern but kind woman named Mrs. Johnson, asked Clara a few questions before agreeing to hire her. "You'll start tomorrow," Mrs. Johnson said. "Be here by M sharp." Clara could hardly believe her luck. She hugged Linda tightly. "Thank you for everything. I promise I'll make this work." The job was tough. Clara spent long hours on her feet cleaning, cooking, and serving customers. But she embraced the work, grateful for the opportunity. With her first paycheck, she sent money home to her mother and Emily. "Thank you, Clara," Margaret said over the phone. "I'm proud of you." Those words brought Clara to tears. Months passed, and Clara continued to save every naira she earned. She learned the ins and outs of running a business from Mrs. Johnson, who often praised her dedication. One evening, as Clara and Linda sat in the apartment, Clara made an announcement. "I've saved enough money to rent my own place." Linda beamed with pride. "Clara, I knew you could do it. You've worked so hard." Clara hugged her friend tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for everything." Clara's days at the restaurant were long and exhausting, but they were also rewarding. Mrs. Johnson, the owner, had taken a liking to her, often giving her advice and encouragement. "Clara," she said one day as they closed up for the evening, "you remind me of myself when I was younger. Hardworking, determined. If you keep this up, you'll go far." Those words stayed with Clara, fueling her determination. She spent her free time learning more about the business, observing how Mrs. Johnson managed the kitchen and handled customers. As the months rolled by, Clara's savings began to grow. Though her apartment was small and modest, it was a space she could call her own. Every month, she sent money back to her mother in the village. Margaret would often call to thank her, her voice softer and more supportive than before. "You're doing well, my daughter," Margaret said one evening. "Emily misses you, but I tell her you're working hard for her future." Clara's heart ached at the mention of her daughter. She longed to hold Emily in her arms, but she knew she had to focus on building a stable life first. One evening, as Clara and Linda sat in her apartment, Clara shared her thoughts. "I've been thinking," she began, "about starting something of my own. Maybe a small fast food joint." Linda's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. You already know so much about the business, and you're great with people. But it's a big step," Clara said, doubt creeping into her voice. "What if I fail?" "You won't," Linda said firmly. "You're the most determined person I know. If anyone can do it, it's you." Encouraged by her friend's confidence, Clara began to plan. She saved every extra naira she could, cutting back on personal expenses and working extra shifts whenever possible. After a year of hard work and careful planning, Clara finally had enough money to rent a small space in a bustling part of the city. She transformed it into a cozy fast food joint, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and setting up a simple but welcoming counter. On the day of the grand opening, Linda was by her side, helping her set up the last of the chairs. "You've done it, Clara," Linda said with a smile. "This is just the beginning." The first few weeks were challenging. Clara worked tirelessly, often sleeping only a few hours a night. But word of her delicious meals and friendly service spread quickly, and soon, customers began to flock to her small eatery. One evening, As Clara counted the day's earnings, Linda stopped by to visit. "Clara, you've done so well," she said. "Have you thought about bringing Emily to the city? You've built something amazing here. She deserves to see it." Clara paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I've thought about it every day. I want her to be here with me, but I needed to make sure I could provide for her first. I think the time is finally right." With her fast food joint thriving and a new sense of confidence, Clara prepared to reunite with her daughter. She knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, she felt hope. Clara stood outside her fast food joint, watching the steady stream of customers coming and going. It had been 6 months since she opened the business, and each day brought new challenges and triumphs. The small eatery had become popular in the neighborhood, and Clara was finally earning enough to make bigger plans. That morning, after sending some money to her mother, Clara made a decision. She dialed Margaret's number and waited as the phone rang. "Clara, how are you?" Margaret's voice came through, warm yet tired. "I'm fine, Mama," Clara replied, "and I have good news. I want you to bring Emily to the city. It's time she stays with me." There was a pause on the line before Margaret responded, her voice thick with emotion. "Clara, are you sure? It's not easy raising a child in the city." "I'm sure, Mama," Clara said firmly. "I've worked hard for this moment. I want Emily to be with me." Margaret agreed, and arrangements were made for Emily to join Clara the following week. The day Clara went to the bus terminal to pick up Emily was one she would never forget. As the bus rolled to a stop, Clara's heart raced. She spotted her mother stepping down, holding the hand of a little girl with bright eyes and a curious smile. "Emily," Clara called, rushing forward. Emily turned and, recognizing her mother, broke into a wide grin. "Mama," she cried, running into Clara's arms. Clara held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. It had been over 2 years since she last saw her daughter, and the reunion was overwhelming. "Look at you," Clara said, brushing a hand over Emily's soft curls. "You've grown so much." Margaret stood nearby, watching the scene with a faint smile. "You've done well, Clara. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Mama," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. Life in the city was an adjustment for Emily, but she quickly adapted. Clara made sure her daughter was enrolled in a good school and spent her evenings helping her with homework. Emily's laughter filled the small apartment, bringing a joy Clara hadn't felt in years. At the fast food joint, business continued to thrive. Clara worked hard, ensuring her customers were satisfied, and that her meals were of the highest quality. Over time, she expanded the menu and added more seating, transforming the eatery into a full-fledged restaurant. One Saturday afternoon, as Clara cleaned the counter, a middle-aged man approached her. He wore a crisp suit and carried an air of authority. "Are you the owner of this place?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Clara replied, her curiosity piqued. "I've heard a lot about your food," the man said. "I run a catering company and would like to discuss a partnership." Clara was stunned. A catering partnership could take her business to the next level. She agreed to meet with the man the following week to discuss the details. The deal went through, and Clara's restaurant became the preferred caterer for several events in the city. Her success grew, and with it, her confidence. She expanded her staff, hired more cooks, and even bought new equipment to improve efficiency. Through it all, Clara remained grounded, focusing on Emily and her dreams for the future. She often thought about Richard, the man who had abandoned her, but only as a reminder of how far she had come. One evening, as Clara and Emily sat together in the restaurant after closing hours, Emily asked a question that caught Clara off guard. "Mama, where is my daddy?" Clara's heart sank, but she composed herself. "He's not here, my love, but you have me, and that's all that matters." Emily nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. But Clara knew the question would resurface someday. For now, she focused on the life she had built and the bright future ahead. It was a busy afternoon at Clara's restaurant. The aroma of freshly cooked meals wafted through the air as customers filled the tables, chatting and enjoying their food. Clara, dressed in her signature apron, moved around with practiced ease, overseeing her staff and ensuring everything ran smoothly. At one corner table sat a young couple, laughing over a plate of jollof rice and fried chicken. At another, a group of office workers discussed their day while sipping on chilled sodas. The restaurant was thriving, and Clara couldn't have been prouder. As she wiped her hands on a towel and checked on the cash register, she heard the door chime. A man stepped in, looking around as if searching for something. Clara didn't pay him much attention at first, but when her eyes finally landed on him, she froze. It was Richard. Clara's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly composed herself. She turned her back and busied herself with the stack of plates on the counter, pretending not to notice him. Richard hadn't recognized her immediately. He had entered with one of his many girlfriends, a slim, flamboyant woman who clung to his arm like a trophy. But as they approached the counter to place their order, Richard caught a glimpse of Clara's face. His steps faltered. He blinked, as if unsure of what he was seeing. "Clara?" he whispered under his breath. The woman beside him tugged at his arm. "What are you staring at? Let's order." Richard snapped out of his daze, quickly placing their order. Clara didn't meet his gaze, acting as though he was just another customer. But Richard couldn't stop staring. The confident, polished woman standing behind the counter was a far cry from the timid village girl he had once abandoned. After their meal, Richard couldn't resist asking the security guard outside about the restaurant. "Who owns this place?" he inquired, his tone casual. "That would be Miss Clara," the guard replied, his voice filled with admiration. "She's the heart of this place. Built it from the ground up." Richard felt a wave of guilt and disbelief wash over him. The name confirmed that this was the same Clara he had denied years ago. He remembered the pain on her face that day, and the insults her mother had hurled at him. He hadn't cared back then, too consumed with his reckless lifestyle. But now, seeing her success, he felt a pang of regret he couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, Richard couldn't get Clara out of his mind. He began visiting the restaurant regularly, though he always kept a low profile. He would sit at a corner table, observing her from afar. He noticed how she treated her staff with respect and how customers adored her. One evening, Richard decided to approach her. As the restaurant emptied out and Clara prepared to close for the day, he walked up to the counter. "Clara," he began, his voice soft. She looked up, her expression neutral. "Yes? Can I help you?" "It's me, Richard," he said, as if she could ever forget. "I know who you are," Clara replied coldly. "What do you want?" Richard hesitated, his confidence faltering under her piercing gaze. I just want to say I'm sorry for everything." Clara's laugh was bitter. "Sorry? Do you think an apology can erase what you did? The pain you caused?" "I know I was wrong," Richard said quickly. "I was young, stupid, and selfish. But I've changed, Clara. I want to make things right." "Make things right?" Clara repeated, her voice rising. Clara's voice echoed in the empty restaurant. "Make things right? Richard, you denied me and our child. You left me to face humiliation, shame, and struggles all on my own. Do you even understand what I've been through?" Richard's head hung low. For once, the man who always exuded arrogance seemed genuinely remorseful. "Clara, I was a fool. I thought I was living my best life, but all I've done is hurt people. Seeing you now, successful and strong, it makes me realize how much I've lost." Clara shook her head. "This isn't about what you've lost, Richard. This is about what Emily and I went through because of your actions. Do you even know your daughter's name?" Richard looked up, his eyes wide with guilt. "Emily," he whispered. "I heard the guard mention her name. You missed 5.5 years of her life," Clara continued. "And now you walk in here, thinking an apology will fix everything?" "I don't expect forgiveness," Richard said, his voice trembling. "But I want to be part of her life. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try. Please, Clara." Over the next few weeks, Richard did his best to show Clara he was serious. He started by sending gifts for Emily: a school bag, storybooks, and toys. Clara accepted them but made it clear that material things wouldn't earn him a place in their lives. Richard also began volunteering at the restaurant, helping Clara and her staff during busy hours. It wasn't easy for him. He was used to being served, not serving others, but he stuck with it, determined to earn Clara's trust. Slowly, Clara began to see a different side of Richard. He was patient, humble, and genuinely interested in being there for Emily. Still, she kept her guard up, reminding herself of the pain he had caused. One Saturday afternoon, Richard met Emily for the first time. Clara had agreed to let him take her to the park under her supervision. As Emily played on the swings, Richard watched her with a mix of awe and regret. "She's beautiful," he said softly. "She's my world," Clara replied. "And she's happy. I won't let anyone take that from her." "I don't want to take anything," Richard said. "I just want to give to her and to you. I know I can never undo the past, but I want to be better." Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched Emily laugh as she soared higher on the swing. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Richard could change. Richard continued to show up for Emily, taking her on small outings and spending time with her whenever Clara allowed it. Emily quickly warmed up to him, calling him daddy without hesitation. Clara, however, remained cautious. Her focus was on Emily and her growing business, not on rekindling any sort of relationship with Richard. As the months passed, Richard became a regular part of their lives, though Clara still didn't trust him completely. She couldn't deny the effort he was making. She began to see glimpses of a man she might have been able to love, if only he hadn't broken her heart first. Months turned into a year, and Richard's presence became a constant in Emily's life. He took her to school, helped her with homework, and even spent time at the restaurant, learning more about Clara's business. To outsiders, they might have looked like a family slowly piecing itself back together, but Clara knew better. Her instincts kept her guarded, her heart reminding her of the scars she carried. One day, Richard proposed a bold idea. "Clara, why don't we open a second restaurant together?" he suggested one evening as they sat discussing business. Clara looked at him, her brow furrowed. "Why would I do that?" "I've been watching how hard you work," Richard said. "Your success has inspired me, and I want to support you. We could expand your brand, make it even bigger." Clara hesitated. The idea of expansion was tempting, but something about Richard's sudden interest made her uneasy. "I'll think about it," she said curtly, brushing him off. Over the next few weeks, Richard continued to press the idea. He even went as far as drafting a business plan, presenting it to Clara with enthusiasm. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was more interested in the business than in making amends. One evening, she overheard him on the phone, his voice low but firm. "Just give me time," he was saying. "Once I'm in, I'll have access to everything." Clara's heart sank. She stepped back, careful not to let him notice her presence. The man who claimed to have changed was still the same, driven by self-interest and deceit. The next morning, Clara confronted him. "Richard, I heard your conversation last night," she said, her voice steady. Richard's eyes widened. "Clara, I can explain." "No need," she interrupted. "I gave you a chance to prove you'd changed, and you failed. You've been playing a game, trying to manipulate me into trusting you again." "It's not like that," Richard insisted. "I just wanted to be part of your success." Clara shook her head. "No. You wanted to take credit for something you had no part in building. But I won't let you. You've hurt me once, Richard, and I won't give you the chance to do it again." Richard's face fell as Clara continued. "You can still be a part of Emily's life if she wants you there. But as for me, we're done. Don't come near my business or my personal life ever again." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw the resolve in her eyes. For the first time, he realized he had lost her completely. Over the next few weeks, Clara made it clear that her boundaries were non-negotiable. Richard was allowed to visit Emily under supervision, but his involvement in Clara's life ended there. She focused on expanding her business on her own terms, refusing to let anyone else take control of her hard-earned success. One day, as she sat in her office, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, Clara smiled. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak, carving a life of dignity and purpose for herself and her daughter. She knew the truth now. Some people never change, and forgiving them doesn't mean giving them a chance to hurt you again. As she tucked Emily into bed that night, she whispered, "Remember, my love, a person that has hurt you in the past will not hesitate to hurt you if given the chance. Always guard your heart." Emily nodded sleepily, and Clara kissed her forehead. The story teaches us that resilience and hard work lead to success. Trust must be earned, Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and a person who has hurt you before may hurt you again if given the chance. Thank you for staying till the end. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel.